Chapter 2. The World Around Us. Unit 4. The Way That Carbon Gets Around.
The Earth is a dynamic place, and as such, elements tend to shift throughout the global ecosystem. Of particular importance is the cycling of carbon, which is the sixth most common element in the universe. Like other natural cycles, carbon is used by various processes as it flows from one form to another. Carbon is a key part of all organic material. Without carbon cycling from the atmosphere to plants, to the soil and back, life on Earth would not exist. The carbon cycle begins in the atmosphere. There, carbon combines with oxygen to form carbon dioxide or CO2. Actually, CO2 is not very abundant in the atmosphere, but it is important. CO2 is a greenhouse gas. Together, all of the greenhouse gases help keep our planet warm enough for life to exist here. CO2 is also the major greenhouse gas which humans affect. In fact, some researchers believe that our effects on CO2 levels are changing the global environment. Plant life plays a large role in the carbon cycle. Plants, both on land and in water, remove CO2 from the atmosphere through photosynthesis. This is a process by which plants use sunlight and CO2 to produce simple sugars. These are then used by plants for food and growth. In this process, carbon is stored as part of plant tissues. Carbon also can be removed from the atmosphere through another process. Oceans and other bodies of water can absorb a lot of CO2. Sea life, such as coral and shellfish, uses the CO2 to make calcium carbonate for shells and growth. As they die, the calcium carbonate builds up at the bottom of the oceans. Over time, this may build up as limestone mountains and even form dry land above the ocean surface. As the cycle continues, one of two things can happen to carbon on land or in the ocean. Carbon can be buried underground or under the sea floor as plants die and decompose. Over millions of years, this material can be turned into fossil fuels. Carbon that is not buried can also move through the food chain as animals and humans eat plant material. The cycle is completed as stored carbon is released back into the atmosphere. One way this occurs is by decomposition of waste of carbon materials that were eaten. Bacteria are the driver of this decomposition process. Carbon is also released in the form of methane gas, which is created by animals as they eat plant material. The carbon cycle is a natural process. However, today humans are impacting it, particularly through the burning of fossil fuel. Naturally, the carbon in fossil fuels is fixed in place, locked out of the natural carbon cycle. Through the burning the fossil fuels, we essentially unlock it and release it into the atmosphere. The industrialization, modernization, and urbanization of civilization have all required enormous amounts of natural resources. One effect of population growth is the increased use of and need for additional resources. This has resulted in the loss of wide areas of forests and jungles. Logging and land lost to agriculture, while needed for continued growth of societies, have seriously affected the Earth's ability to buffer CO2 levels in the atmosphere. Population growth has also required additional production in factories. This has been achieved through the burning of fossil fuels, both in factories and automobiles. In fact, 3.3 billion tons of man-made CO2 are released into the atmosphere each year. Dire consequences may or may not result from man's CO2 production over the past century. Perhaps only time will tell. The question we need to answer now is this: do we wait to find out, or do we take action now? For many, myself included, it is clear that we cannot continue our current habits. International groups have called for immediate action on the part of countries producing the highest amounts of CO2 today. Unfortunately, such calls to action are only slowly acted upon or even ignored by industrialized nations.